Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Squad Room Podcast, the place for cops who want to transform their leadership, create more resilience, and generate more balance in their life. On this show, we cover the tactics and strategies you can use every day to create a life worth living, both in and out of uniform. My name is Garrett Teslaw, and I'm a full-time lieutenant for a sheriff's office in Southern California, and I'm glad you're with us today. Before we get to our guest, I want to remind you of a few things. First, if you're on social media, make sure you're following us at the Squad Room and that you've liked our Facebook page. Also, make sure to join our Facebook group. Just search the Squad Room group to join. But most importantly is that you head over to thesquadroom.net and get signed up for our mailing list. People on that list get exclusive access to free resource downloads and a weekly email from me on things you need to know about. I also send out content that's exclusive to that list, so don't miss out on something that can help you in your life or in your job. Join our list at thesquadroom.net. You've heard me talking about our sponsor In Time for a few episodes now, and I wanted to share something with you that they just released. When they reached out to partner on the show, I knew they were the kind of company I wanted to work with because they obviously understand the challenges that the individual officers are facing out there on the streets. In Time now has a wellness solution available in addition to their scheduling and time management cloud software. The In Time Wellness Solution has a customizable library of department-curated recommendations, including doctors, counselors, and other resources. What's really cool is if you're using their scheduling software, you can also monitor staff fatigue and hours worked to ensure compliance with policy and stay safe with data-driven insights and dashboards. With fatigue management, smart alerts, you can protect agencies from liabilities and the avoidable accidents. Plus, their new training level alerts protect the agency and staff from working assignments they aren't prepared for or they aren't trained for. This can be a real liability, especially in larger agencies. If you're interested in spending less time on scheduling, eliminating redundant and expensive overtime, increasing your compliance with subpoenas, and reducing the stress and fatigue on your employees, go to intime.com/thesquadroom to learn more about their amazing system. This episode is sponsored by officerprivacy.com. In the age of the internet, social media, and smartphones, there's so much amazing information at our fingertips. I can research any topic or person I want to and learn all about them, their family, and way more information than I really should be able to. The problem is, people can do that research on us too. Whether we like it or not, our information is on the internet, out there for people to find, even the bad guys. Just accepting this and doing nothing isn't an option. We as cops have a giant target on our back these days. Sometimes that's literal and it's life or death, and other times it's just dealing with potential harassment. Either way, we don't want to expose our families to these risks. Being careful about what you post on social media doesn't go far enough. It's easy for a bad guy with an iPhone and free Wi-Fi to hunt you down. That's why officerprivacy.com exists. My friend Pete James is the founder, and he spent 25 years in law enforcement here in California, using much of his career to hunt down the criminals and evidence on the computers and the internet that we now use. Pete knows how easy it is to find you, and since he's one of the good guys, he can help. OfficerPrivacy.com offers 2 packages to choose from to help you clean up your side of the internet. Their premium service allows you to sit back and let the professionals do the work, where they will work to scrub the internet's top 50 people search sites that can expose your home address. Then they work to maintain your privacy by monitoring those same sites. If you show up again, they will remove you again. They also offer an at-home solution for those of you that have the time and the technical ability to do it yourself. I don't, so that's why I use their premium service, but you can do it all yourself using their proprietary software. You can remove yourself and your family members from these same top 50 people search sites on the internet, and then use the software to conduct audits as often as you'd like to make sure that you haven't been added back. To learn more about how you can keep safe, check them out at officerprivacy.com/thesquadroom. When you sign up through that link, you'll get a free USB data blocker, and your first month of monitoring is free. That's officerprivacy.com/thesquadroom. Kyle Stubbs, welcome to the Squad Room. You are officially, I think, my first Mountie. So there you go for that. Plaque is in the mail.
Yes.
But you have, okay, so for the listeners, I want to give them a little bit of backstory on how we got connected up, because it's my favorite way to connect with people who end up as guests on the show. Because you found the show as a listener and as an active police officer, and you reached out to me a couple years ago. You shot me an email back in 2020, early, like almost, I think, pre-COVID, with some thoughts and asking for my perspective on this program you were developing and these things you wanted to do for first responders and especially for police officers, and your kind of ethos around those things, and you wanted my perspective, but also you were kind of telling me like, hey, I'm starting this thing. And then circle back to me almost 2 years later with, hey, I'm doing the thing, and here's the trainings I went through and all these things, and I've learned so much, and this is what I've learned, and this is what I'm passionate about. And we connected again on that. And I just love when I love it when a guest, and Trevor Wilkins was the same way, and there's others, when their email pops up, I see that there's a thread of past emails with them, right? And it's like, oh, we've communicated before. And I love that it goes back that far. So uh, it's just one of my favorite ways that we end up having a guest on the show. And you were talking about the things that you're passionate about. I was like, dude, you got to come on and talk about these things for the audience, and kind of come full circle with that first email. So I'll stop rambling, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Kyle. Tell everybody about who you are, what you do, where you work, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, greatly appreciate the opportunity to come on. I'm a general duty cop up here in British Columbia, and with the Mounties, like you mentioned. And yeah, I'm pretty quick to preface that that's just my job. That's not who I am, right? Whenever we introduce ourselves, sometimes we get stuck on being like, yeah, I'm a cop, right?
Oh, that's I you know what? Right away, I appreciate that you made that distinction. Yes,
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
So,
yeah.
Aside from that, father, husband, got a couple of little rugrats, a 4 and a 7-year-old, and avid outdoorsman, and a coach for first responders as well. So that's what's lighting me up now. I'd say it's right half and half between my day job as a general duty cop, and then come home and put in some work with other first responders. So that's what's lighting me up.
And so, what's a general duty cop? Because most of our listeners are here in the United States, and we may not understand the difference between that and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Kind of walk us through how that all works, for those of us who are ignorant.
Yeah, like dog sleds and snowmobiles, that kind of thing, for the most part.
I told you I wasn't going to tease you about this, but I'm going to.
I know.
Now you kind of
I can
provoked
bring it on
it,
myself.
There is a moose antler like lying on the floor behind you right now that the listeners can't see. And I told you, it's a bit cliche to be the Canadian guy on the show with the moose. I'm assuming it's a moose antler. It's a giant moose antler.
You're right. We can put that as the
anyway,
thumbnail. That's okay.
There you go. Okay, I'm sorry.
So general duty cop, same as what you guys would say is like a patrol officer. So
patrol. Okay, I got
uniform vehicle, responding to any and every 911 call, from frauds to murders to whatever.
And something I've learned having people like Sean Gorman on the show from Australia, and others, like, regardless of the country you're in, or the jurisdiction, or the name, or the lingo you use, we all have the same job, right? And it really comes down to that. When that 911 call happens, who goes? Well, we go. And whether you're a detective, or you're a chief, or you're somewhere in the middle, like a lieutenant, like I am, like, we've all been the guy that goes when that call comes out. So I want to reiterate too, for people, because I hear so often, the number one email I get from people is, I thought I was the only one. And that goes all the way back to this belief that as a Canadian cop, you're different than me, and you're different than an Australian cop. And there's going to be some dude out there posturing about how, like, we have more gun violence than they do. And that's not something to be proud of, but but the job is the same. The risk is the same. The trauma exposure is the same. So I just want to kind of like lay the foundation right there for people too, and kind of get that off my chest.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the same. And before I was a cop, I was a firefighter and a paramedic before then. So seeing the similarity between all of those first responder positions it's almost the same job, really. Yeah. There's some more inherent risk, obviously, with our job right now than there is responding to a medical emergency. But when you take away the distinct, like, we're number one hands-on out of the picture, the job is shockingly similar, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, for my Tactical Tuesday newsletter that I send out every week, I recently tagged an Instagram account for a firefighter who does like funny videos, Fire Department Chronicles. And they're funny, even though I'm not a firefighter, because they're so relatable to everything else we deal with. That's kind of comical on the medical and the EMS side. So So how long
Absolutely.
have you been on?
Going on 8 years as a cop now, and then 5 years before that as a firefighter paramedic.
And so you have pursued a lot of work uh, on your own, and you've kind of decided to forge this path towards coaching other first responders and learning about the things that we deal with. But knowing from personal experience, that is not typically provoked by just a purely altruistic desire to go out and like heal the world. There has to be something happened internally that caused a motivation, good or bad, to decide that this work was important for you to pursue. And you use words that I like to use all the time, that it lights you up, that that's what is exciting to you right now. So what is it that inside of you either happened or changed, or you decided that you needed to plant your flag and do something different on behalf of others? What was that?
Yeah, and you touched on something very spot on earlier, where that you hear from people that I thought I was the only one, right? And that's how I got started. I got started in, or down this road, at least in 2017, and I was on a date with my wife. We had one little girl at the time, and one of those dates where like you finally get a babysitter, awesome. So we go out on this date, and it's pretty heavy, pretty disconnected, just kind of like that long silences, not really in our groove at all. We got home and we're sitting in the driveway, and I can distinctly remember my wife asking me, "Do you even know how to feel?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course I do. What are you talking about?" Brushed it off. And she said, "I don't know if you're angry or if you're sad or you're happy or what's up. It's all just the same right now." And she got out, went inside, and I was like, no, I must. I know what I'm doing. And up until that point, I got pretty defensive when she said that. Even though she was gone, I couldn't argue it. But I up until that point, I'd been a cop in one of the busiest areas in our province, and a firefighter paramedic before that. And I thought that ability to disconnect, to be emotionless, to be able to just push it aside, I thought that was one of my strongest attributes. I didn't think that it would be the thing that would potentially end my marriage, right? So I went
Mm-hmm.
down that road of being like, okay, I got to fix this, because now I've been challenged. I'm a guy. I'm going to fix this, take it into my own hands.
Right.
So tried therapy. That sure as hell didn't work, right? Got me to talk a little bit, but really it was more of just going there to pat myself on the back for how good I was doing at work or something. I tried meditating, perfect way just to rip whoever was leading that apart because I didn't like the sound of their voice, or I thought they were soft or something, right? Tried journaling, because that's the other thing that you're told you're supposed to do. And that was just a great opportunity to write pages upon pages of how shitty of a dad I was, or how bad of a husband I was, or how angry those people at work made me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I even tried cardio. I'd went in the full David Goggins mode and got like just ran my ass off. I signed up for my first running race, and like not a 5K or something reasonable, a 10K. I signed up for a 50-mile ultra marathon in the mountains. Nailed
Jeez.
that thing, ran the hell out of it, and I was yearning for people's like encouragement and compliments for doing that. And I'd get them, and then I'd just brush them off, and I'd be like, nah, whatever, no big deal. And I was playing this role as a super healthy guy working on himself. But like 4 weeks after that race, with all the great pictures I took on that whole race, I threw my phone against the wall so hard that I broke it for something like so insignificant that I can't even remember what it was about. Right. So I was just masking all these things by trying to quote unquote work on myself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then I started to find things that actually worked after that. That was basically the rock bottom for me at that point. Right. So then I
Mm-hmm.
found, and you and I, really, when we look back at our original connection, is through a men's group, through Traver Boehm's Uncivilized Nation, right? Both
Mm-hmm.
connected kind of through that. And it was amazing to see that there was a whole ton, there's like 100 guys in that, and they all have that same problem. They're all disconnected at home. They're all having trouble being vulnerable in any way whatsoever, right? And they're all in that similar place. So that helped me to actually be like, okay, sweet. I'm not the only person that deals with this. This is great, right?
Mm-hmm.
Start to work on some stuff there. Start to kind of hit the stride a little bit with the encouragement of those guys, and then the wheels fell off almost entirely. I'll continue the rant. And our second daughter was born, and our second daughter was born at 32 weeks, and she was about just over 3 pounds, and she was in the intensive care unit for months and months.
Goodness.
And that whole experience there was very similar to how I felt before, right? I got back into that numb, that disconnected state, right? Started to grow disconnected from my wife because I thought that I was just having to take care of myself while Matilda was in the hospital, but wasn't really tracking how she was doing at all. And started to grow apart there to the point that we almost separated just to like get through this experience, right? Because she was in a rough spot. She almost died. But they were able to do some neurosurgeries on her spine, shave away this really bad infection she had in one of her vertebrae, and she pulled through. But it left me basically right where I was before, of just like stuck, numb, disconnected, not checking in with anybody. Meanwhile, anybody asks you how you're doing. Oh, great, awesome, doing good. Yeah, everybody's doing good. Matilda's doing a lot better. Chelsea's doing great. Yeah, everything's fine. When not the case in any way whatsoever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what switched for me is that I was avid podcast listener. I heard this guy, Mark England, on a podcast talk about language and how our language quite often holds us down to the spot that we're in, right? And he talks about how the self-talk, not just the language we use to others, but the self-talk that we use to ourselves, right, can just keep us in this place, right? Keep us stuck, keep us disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And learning about that, learning how I can use that to get out of that place is what just totally lit the spark for me, right?
So that's a good place to kind of start in this discussion, because you talked about journaling and meditation, and those are two things I always encourage, but you bring up the potential unintended consequence of doing those things without maybe some direction or
Yeah.
some eye towards the positive growth that can come out of journaling, or if it's unguided, the things that it might provoke. So we all have a narrative in our head going on 24/7 that is, you know it's the most influential voice we'll ever hear, and it's the one side of our head, right? And
Yeah.
what I had a hard time learning was that voice is not always correct. It's often and then, in fact, we were joking right before I hit record about imposter syndrome, right? And like just getting over the challenge of feeling like you're good enough to do it. And I joked and said, hey, 7 years in, I expect any day now I'm going to get over it. you know it's
Yeah.
always there. That's just as an example for people of the language we use, or the language, I'm not a good father, or I can't I can't feel any emotions anymore, or I can't recover from this thing, these things that we have convinced ourselves to do. So let's talk about language a little bit, because that aligns, of course, with what I talk about with badges, your
Yeah.
beliefs, and your actions. Particularly, those two things go hand in hand, and of course our language is formed by our beliefs. So I think we have a launching point there. So can you share a little bit more about that with us?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that our language affects is our mindset, obviously. So how we interact with the rest of the world, and how we interact with ourselves. So like a big key, not a keyword, but a hot word nowadays is like the victim mindset or the victim mentality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is
Mm-hmm.
what feeds on our shitty language, right? A lot of people don't know when they think victim mentality, like a lot of, especially in our world, a lot of people are thinking like that domestic partner that won't leave their spouse that you arrest 5 times, right?
Mm-hmm.
They think that's like the victim mentality. And it's I've I've made a point to really memorize the definition of this. So it'll sound probably when I say it like I'm reading it, but just so that everybody's on the same page with where we're starting with the victim mentality, the definition of it is that it's an acquired personality trait where a person tends to regard himself or herself as the negative as the victim of the negative actions of others, right? Even in the absence of clear evidence. And that victim mentality depends on a habitual thought process and attributions. So that thought process is those words we're saying to ourselves, and those attributions are like our shitty words and our shitty breathing. All these things start to feed it, right? So something
Mm-hmm.
as simple as like the word should. How often do we use that word in our realm? We're like, oh yeah, I should take care of this, or I should start getting a better night's sleep. I should start meditating. I should start doing these. These are all like pressure words, or I need to. I have to do this, right? We get enough
Mm-hmm.
pressure from the job itself that we don't need to be pressuring ourselves 99% of the time when we're off the job, right?
Very true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's go ahead. Sorry.
nope, I want to hear it.
Oh, I was just thinking, like, I mean, obviously, I think when you gave that definition, uh, a lot of people were listening, flashed in their minds someone they work with,
Yeah.
and frankly, a lot of us carry that victim mentality about that relationship with our agency. I did for a while
Yeah.
over some nonsense, right? But like when I think we're particularly prone, we as cops and fire EMS, like first responders, but we're talking cops here. Uh, we are particularly prone to a victim mentality, even though we see the victims of the DV, like you said, and we think, oh, we're not them, we're not that way, we would get out. But at the same time, we get hooked by the organizational stress, by the things that are outside of our control within the agency or within the larger scope of policing, especially these days. The general tone of policing and defunding and all that sort of stuff gives people the fuel to turn over control and to turn over their mindset to these outside factors to then become that victim, and they get hooked. And it's a fast ride to the bottom when we cede control to those things, right? And I only speak from experience on that one, because I've done it. So I wanted to kind of bring that up as a picture of a very specific way that we as cops just sometimes actively and voluntarily engage in that kind of mindset.
Yeah. And what you're speaking on right there is a perfect example of like the projections that we use, right? I'm divorced because of the job. I'm unhealthy because of the job. I have high blood pressure because of the job. We can
Mm-hmm.
translate that and be like, I'm divorced because I lost sight of what's important, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm unhealthy because I started to rely on food for energy, or I have high blood pressure because I drink and smoke 24/7 on my days off, right? We
Mm-hmm.
stop taking responsibility for the things and we start just putting it onto something else all the time, right? And that's really
So
common. You see that in that, like that moral injuries that so many guys have, where it's like, it's understandable. Like, yeah, we get that, but we have to be able to shift out of that, right? We can't constantly be blaming something else for the state that we're in.
so here's the question then, and here's I think where that really gets people tripped up is we have to take responsibility, right? We can't put this onto something that's outside of our control. But for all of us, the vast majority of us anyway, that translates into those shoulds. Oh, I should be better about this. I
Yeah.
should be calmer. I should work out more. I should do my firearms twice a week when I'm off. I should be doing jujitsu, whatever. And we're inundated with messages from police influencers or training or any of those things, people we follow, that we should be doing these things because they do those things and we have to do those things. And then it creates this angst of like should that's like stuck in your throat that we can eventually choke on. How do we navigate from taking control and not blaming something outside of ourselves, but not then turning it internally into this expectation of and the difference between what we do and what we're capable of and what we think we should be doing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. As a perfect segue into a little game that I like to play with a lot of guys, and I lead this through workshops as well. It's called a should detox, right? So should, like we touched on, is one of those words that just hits us, right? And we use
Mm-hmm.
it, we depend on it in our language quite often, right? So if anybody listening, grab a pen and a paper. If you're at work right now, I know you have a pen and paper because it's in your vest, in your notebook, right?
No
You can
excuses,
explain
everyone.
you can explain to court why you did this in your notebook, right? You were trying to better yourself. Okay. So think of, and Garrett, you got a pen?
Got a pen.
Perfect. So any you could do this with three different sentences if you want, right? Something that you should be doing. So I should learn how to meditate. I should spend more time with the kids, right? Just let me know when you got a couple on there.
Just a couple?
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, whatever.
This is great podcasting. Dead space while I think
Right?
about it, but
Dead
I'm going to
space.
work on these.
I'll fill it up and I'll
Okay.
talk about how much of an easy target we as police are for influencers on Instagram. If you just put some OD
Yeah,
green
chat
on
on that.
or some coyote gray, you could pretty much have anybody do anything, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't take much. So quite common
Yeah.
what guys are doing with this, with the should, right? Once you have a couple on here and we go over them, that should language, we think that we're using it in a way to better ourselves, like thinking at it with a growth mindset. I should be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
When really all it's doing is furthering that guilt for not having done it already.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's what
Yeah.
we're going to
Okay.
touch on. So you got a couple?
I got three. They're just off the top of my head. I didn't go too deep just because I
Okay.
didn't want to,
Let's
it's an hour.
hear them.
I don't think the first one's gonna be a shock to anybody. Or it's not. I mean, a lot of people are gonna relate on this one, but I should work out more. I've shared on the show in the past that I went through a medical diagnosis with a incurable disease that required a surgery and like just kind of really, really, really effed up life for over a year. And part of that was that I just couldn't work out, and that's not an excuse. Like I couldn't, right?
Yeah.
And as I'm recovering from surgery and I'm at a point where now I feel stronger and I feel better, but I'm like, as we're talking, I'm staring at the Peloton bike that hasn't gotten, I'm not even sure if it's plugged in. And behind me is my squat rack that, is noticeably missing the bar because it's tucked in the corner.
Yeah.
And, so the hard version of me would say I should be doing those things. Now, to be fair and transparent, I am at a better spot than I would be typically. And so I know that my counter to that is, but I'm doing other things, right? I'm going for the longer walks and I'm taking the opportunity to do some of those things that I feel comfortable with at this moment, and that I lead a very busy life as it is. So the 4:30 a.m. wake ups are not in my zone of reality right now, but that might change. It might not, but working with what I've got. So,
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm kind of at with that stuff, I guess.
Yeah. And what are your other two?
Oh, I should eat cleaner, right?
Okay.
I had a nice bowl of pasta last night, and it was tasty, So I'm rewarding myself in that way too. And one that I was thinking about a lot this morning actually is I should get outside more.
Okay.
I'm in an office job now. I don't get to travel around as much. I'm at an office at work. I'm at my home, and I live in a beautiful area, of course, and so like I need to enjoy it more. That's all.
Yeah. Easy. So for anybody that wrote theirs down that's listening, say it out loud now to yourself. Pick the one that's most important. And then ask yourself, how does that feel after you said it? Right. So Garrett, you said right after you gave the first one that I should work out more. You gave some reasoning right after it. And when you say that I should work out more without an explanation behind it, how does that feel to say I should work out more?
Yeah, this is such an important thing to talk about, right? Because there's immediate guilt that you're not doing something and that you're living in a gap between where you are and where you think you should be.
Perfect. Yeah. So take your pen Well, let's work off of that. I should work out more one, just for the sake of
Okay.
time.
It's an easy one.
Scratch out should
Mhm.
and put could in replace of it.
All right.
And now
I could
read it.
work out more.
How does
I
that
could
feel in
work out more.
comparison?
Yeah, it obviously changes the tone, and I think it just opens the language to the idea that there's a possibility
Yeah.
there.
Okay.
Instead of an expectation, there's a possibility.
Yeah. So now in this one, I know, and you're big on breath, right? And we should all be big on breath. If we're big on anything, we should be focused on our breath.
Mm-hmm.
Scratch out the word could, and now you're going to put can in replace of it. And after you read this sentence, take a nice full breath. And then tell me how that feels.
I can work out more. Yeah, I mean, I think it opens more space to that possibility.
Okay. Now add because onto the end of that. And
I can
fill in
work
the
out
blank,
more
obviously.
because, well, as I just touched on, I can work out more because I have resources here at my house. I have the Peloton, I have the squat rack, I have the weights, etc.
What would it mean for you if you worked out more? Right?
Well, certainly less stress, right? We all know that. We all know that the
Yes.
physical exercise work is less stress. So that's a big one.
Yeah. So a lot of us, especially cops here, when we put on, there's reasons why we put on the word because. We won't go into great detail about that, but there's been studies about how impactful that word actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us will just say because I have the ability to do it or because I have the time or whatever. I really encourage people, if you're following along with this, when you fill in the space after because, fill it in with something that, because I can work out more because I know that I feel fantastic after that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or like use your imagination. Imagination is far more important. I can't remember the exact quote that Einstein said. Imagination is far more important than knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we really lack the ability to imagine how good things can be, right? We start to fire that up a little bit. So that's the point of that game there, right? Start to see how easy that we can replace words like should, throw a
Mm-hmm.
can in there, a can because, and all of a sudden it went from something where we're feeling guilty
Mm-hmm.
and we're feeling shameful for not having done to something that we're optimistic about. And now we've painted this picture in our heads of being like, oh, fuck yeah, man. Remember when I used to slay the Peloton? And
Yeah.
I'd be like, cock of the walk, walking around town all day long. I got that. Like, let's get back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And that plays off of something, being able to play that in our head and be able to plant that seed in our head plays off of something that is the foundational reasons on why language is so important to us. And that's that we're actually hardwired in our brain to pick up on some things. Right. And what that is, it's a fancy thing in our brain, right at the top of the brainstem called the reticular activating system. Right. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah, a little
Yeah.
bit. I'm not super familiar, but
Yeah. So most of us have had this experience where we're going to buy a car. We're going to buy a new whatever. I don't want to say Ford Explorer because we drive enough of those as it is. We're going to buy a new Toyota Tacoma, okay? And we start researching them. We're like, oh yeah, I like this package and this color, this really unique blue color. This is great. And then all of a sudden, you start picking them up left, right, and center. Have you had that experience before?
yeah, this is actually something we learned about in market. My undergrad degrees in marketing, and
Yeah,
they're big on this as a theory. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah. And what was it with you? What have you had in your experience with it?
Oh, it's funny because it's when you know it's there, you still catch yourself doing it. So basically, you want that white Tacoma SRD package. All of a sudden, everyone in town's got a white Tacoma with the
Yeah,
SRD package. Your
yeah,
brain selects and selectively picks out the thing that you want, or the thing that's top of mind anyway,
yeah,
to you. Yeah, it's really fascinating.
yeah. And that's the RAS's job in your brain is to unconsciously pick things out that you've told it is important to it. So you've done the time, you've researched this thing. So you've told this part of your brain that, okay, this is important to me. I need
Hmm.
to find more of this. So you're driving around, you're not looking for these, but all of a sudden you're picking them out left, right, and center. Right.
Hmm.
The same thing happens with our words and our thoughts. Okay. You start
Hmm.
dwelling on all that shitty stuff, all that negative side of things. You're telling that part of your brain, okay, let's start picking that stuff up. So you start picking it up left, right, and center. Right. If we start to make the effort to switch that, right. And I know
Hmm.
this isn't tactical to talk about stuff like this, right? But if we start to switch it and we start to look at the positive things, we start to use that language in a positive way,
Hmm.
it fires that RAS into gear and we start picking that stuff up instead of the bad stuff.
Yeah, I think that's why gratitude, for me, gratitude practices are so important
Yeah.
because, dude, I tell you, when I was in that victim mentality, especially, I was looking for all the evidence I could find that I was right, and I would take even stuff that probably wasn't wasn't evidence or wasn't directly related to me at all, and I would just point to it and say, "See, like
Yep.
that's like right there. That's proof. That's the proof right there. Everybody, see." And I'm over there like a crazy man on the corner, shouting at everybody, like, "Look at me, I'm right."
Yeah.
For me, that transition had to happen to those that language that we use and breaking away from it. And for me, one of the fastest and best ways to do that was when I learned about gratitude practices. And for me, it's just three things in the morning that I'm grateful for. It can be simple or it can be profound. This morning, one of them was I just love a good cup of coffee. The other was that my patio furniture wasn't wet from the dew overnight, so I could sit outside. Like, and then of course, then you can go all the way to the big stuff, like your kids or
Yeah.
your family, your health, or whatever. But when you can work on just appreciating the fact that you can sit outside in the morning and it's comfortable, it's not cold yet, etc., man, does your world open up to the possibility that, what, life is actually pretty good. For the
Yes.
vast majority of us, regardless of what we're going through. I just went through a surgery and a hospital stay and navigating an incurable disease, but yet nonetheless, I now know, what? Life is pretty good, and I can manage the things that come up, and I can be a cop at work, but that doesn't have to be who I am. Just go back to the first thing you said at the beginning. So that's what's
Yeah.
working for me, but I'd like to hear what you encourage people to do and to make that shift as well.
Yeah, and that's spot on. Like that's the power behind a practice like that, right? Is that it sets, and especially because it sets you into gear right from the beginning, right?
Hmm.
And there's a reason why we can't see all this good stuff around us, and that's, I like to think of like the victim mentality as this monster in our community, right? And
Hmm.
it's like huge. It takes up this huge big shadow, it casts a big shadow, and all like the good stuff hides in that shadow, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
all of our wins, all of our like accomplishments, right? All the positive attributes that we don't recognize in people, it's all
Hmm.
hiding in that. So we have to get it out of there. One of my favorite ways to get it out of there is similar to like your gratitude practice. Is I'll tell people, and this is a journaling practice, very simple. You can set a timer on your phone for it. Doesn't have to be long. It can be 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes, and just think of one thing, like my wife. What am I grateful? What do I love about my wife? Set the timer, and then just start point forming anything and everything you can think of. Right? Something that we
Hmm.
don't ever really think to do. Start to appreciate things, and it doesn't have to be for other people. It could be what do you like about yourself? Right? 3 minutes. Start putting stuff down. Right? Doesn't take a lot of time. Doesn't take a ton of effort, and that really kicks that RAS into gear. Where all of a sudden we're starting to like pick out good things. Like, oh, that's one
Hmm.
thing I could have added that to the list this morning. That was I love it when she touches my back like that. Right? You start to pick
Hmm.
up these little things. Right? So we're always trying to keep that ball rolling.
Mm.
Right?
I love that idea, that exercise. Just pick one thing and list that out, because especially with families and the job we have and getting closed off to emotion, like you were talking about how your wife challenged you. we there's those things are still there, but we just we set it aside. Again, looking, as we, and I don't think as cops, like, we decide, hey, when I walk in the door at home, I'm going to be turned off emotionally. I'm going to be disconnected. I'm going to be distant. I'm going to be an ass to my kids. Like, no one walks in the house thinking they're that way. Right. But almost every cop at some point who's in a marriage or in a long-term relationship has had the challenge to, like, stop treating me like one of your suspects. Right.
Yes.
I guarantee every cop who's in any relationship has had that challenge put to them at some point. For me, it was more than most, probably. but but again, we have to take an active role in that transition, because nonetheless, we still have to go out and do the job every day. We still have to go out and answer those 911 calls and go to those calls. But we need practices to help us make that shift. And I think that's a good one. Are there any you have that you can do on a daily basis, or just in a quick couple of moments where someone's, pulling up at the house after a shift and they need to transition and go inside and be a different version of themselves, not a different person, but just the different version of you? I have things I've shared before, but I'd like to hear your
Yeah.
input.
So that's where a lot of the practices that kind of we teach in the program they come out in this, where it's like action steps that we can take at home, right? And I've
Mm-hmm.
heard you talk about some very, very good ones on the show before. And a lot of that for me comes to breath when we want to have a quick switch,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yep.
and we touched on breath earlier about just how it being so important, right? We're all walking around most of our day, our work day at least, and unfortunately a lot of us are walking around on our days off in that same fight or flight parasympathetic driven state, where we are breathing way up high in our chest and super shallow,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's understandable. Like, we're sitting in a car all day, we got a HBA or whatever we have on, or some of you guys are stuck on wearing internals in the States, I hear, which is unfortunate. A lot of,
Yeah.
I don't think there's anyone that wears one voluntarily up here,
Mm-hmm.
but even with an outer carrier on, you're still all constricted, right? It's hard to have good, consistent, solid breaths. So on the way home, start extending that exhale, make it longer than your inhale, right? And make it slow. So take in some, whether that's, I'm a big advocate for the 4-7-8 breathing technique, where you breathe in for 4, you hold for 7, and then you exhale for 8, and
Mm-hmm.
do that on repeat. There's no danger in doing that while you're driving. You're not going to pass out. If anything, you're going to feel fantastic, right? And even if it's as simple as just breathe in for 3 and out, exhale for 5 or 6, right? If we can make
Mm-hmm.
that exhale longer, we start to stimulate the sympathetic and start to be able to get back in control again.
Mm-hmm.
And for anybody that struggles with thinking about how important breathing might be, I like to just, a big motto that we use is that high and tight brings the fight, low and
Mm-hmm.
slow brings the flow. And if you can think about your breathing being low and slow, you're going to come home and flow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other ways on top of that too. There's practices that you can do with some more forceful breathing that can get you to switch states, right? And there's a super simple one. This catches almost every guy that I have shown it off guard, because let's be real, as cops especially, we hate anything that's quote unquote woo, right? Sometimes you need a
Yeah.
little bit of woo in your life. I don't care what you say. Okay. So you need a
That's the
little
episode
bit.
title right there.
Yeah. And a really simple one. The next time if you are feeling like you're ready to snap at something, you're right on the cusp. Simple, as easy as you go to the bathroom, stand in the bathroom with your feet shoulder width apart, and just hop up and down on your heels a little bit. Let your arms go loose, let your arms go floppy, right? And just spend enough to take 5 long, solid breaths while you're bouncing up and down on your heels. And then tell me how you feel afterwards. I guarantee you come back to where you should be. Okay. So it's stuff like that we need to start actually applying to our daily lives.
Why does that work?
Resets us, gets us back in the driver's seat again, right? So like we have these emotions,
Mm-hmm.
which energy in motion. Okay. Like our emotion, if it's just stuck in here, because a lot of time when we get home, we don't know how to release it. Right. So it gets
Mm-hmm.
built up and it gets stuck. Right. This gives us
Mm-hmm.
something like that, a movement practice like that gives us a chance for that emotion to move instead of just being stuck. And if it's stuck, quite often the only way we know how to get rid of it is in some kind of like an outburst
Mm-hmm.
or just to leave. Right.
Yeah. And we leave often, not just, I mean, obviously you can physically leave, but we leave through food. We leave through alcohol and or detaching.
Yeah.
I do this myself. I know I catch myself, coming home and sitting by myself for a while. Some of that's fine and some of it's healthy and it's downtime to kind of
Yeah.
decompress. But at the same time, we need to know that there's balance. The one thing I always encourage people to do, along with the breath, is, before you, in these transitions, when you're transitioning out of your vest in the locker room or when you're pulling up to your curb, what intention are you setting for the next phase of your day?
Yeah.
Right. Like, so who do I want to be when I walk in that door? Do I want to be the cop who's in command and control of the stuff I just dealt with for 12 hours? Or do I want to be an engaged dad? Do I want to be the family cook? Do I want to be an open ear to my wife? Those things, that helps a lot too. If I very intentionally stop, think about what I want to accomplish in the next couple of hours and go in there with that goal oriented mindset of this is who I'm going to be in the next, until bedtime or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that helps a lot too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the key in what you're saying there, which I completely agree with, is that you have the awareness to know to make the switch. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I get
Yeah.
it. I've been there where I don't have that awareness, where I'm just straight into the house. Holy
Mm-hmm.
shit, me versus the world. Right.
Right.
And when we can start to gain that awareness by doing, quote unquote, the work on ourselves, right, then we start to catch those things and be like, okay, I'm I'm not in the place I want to be right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's always a choice. Like awareness it's a hard thing to become good at, and it takes a lot of work, right? It's not something that we can just because you know the knowledge of it. This is my
Mm-hmm.
one of my beefs with um, emotional survival for law enforcement. That's one, like I love the book. It paints us such a good picture for us, but it lacks it a little bit in teaching us how to get out of that spot, right? Like it paints the
Sorry.
picture that magic chair and the cynicism and everything, right? But we need to know how to get out of it. So if you've gained the awareness of it, that this is a problem, that this is an issue that you're having in your life, right? At that point, it's a choice on whether or not you're going to put in the work to not continue down that road anymore, or you're not going to, right? And the thing I hear a lot of guys say is like, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time to learn how to do these things, to
Mm-hmm.
work on self-development, right? And there's a great quote from a book called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, where he says, saying you don't have enough time to improve your life and your thoughts is like saying you don't have enough time to stop for gas while you're driving. You're going to
Nice.
run out of gas.
After the riots and unrest of the summer of 2020, I began to get increasingly concerned about the fact there's so much of my life that is out there accessible to the public. And yes, I know that I'm a public figure in some sort of way, but even then, it still makes me uncomfortable. And I've been trying to figure out where the line should be drawn between what is shared on this podcast or on social media or in interviews I give and what should remain private for the security and safety of my family. Even though I'm a public person, that doesn't mean I want my personal information out there for the bad guys to find. I've arrested enough of them in my career that it makes me nervous to think that my family could be exposed to those dangers. Not long ago, a suspect showed up at the front door of my partner's house, 45 miles away from the station. I've had enough of worrying about it and felt completely outmatched by the internet. I mean, it's the internet. Trying to take my name off of Google seems insurmountable, and I learned that, honestly, it is. But there's a lot that we can do to protect ourselves, and that's removing our names from people's search sites and breaking the links between our home address and our names. I learned all this from my friends at officerprivacy.com, who are helping me to clean up my side of the internet. A quick Google search shows just a shocking amount of information about where I live, where I used to live, my family members, their names, their addresses, and even phone numbers. We need help protecting ourselves from the bad guys. You have partners on your beat, So get a partner on the internet. To learn more about how they can keep you safe, check them out at officerprivacy.com/the squad room. When you sign up through that link, you'll get a free USB data blocker, and your first month of monitoring is free. That's officerprivacy.com/the squad room. Yeah, and whenever we say we don't have time, what we're really saying is I'm not going to prioritize that.
Yeah.
Right? Like we all have the same amount of time. We all have our choices that we make, but we really are prioritizing things over that. And if we were to list out, or if you were to track your day minute by minute about how you spend your time, you could, just like we talked about, with the working out, could find the time in these other areas. Absolutely. But it's really about prioritization. So it's finding a way or a reason to make that more important than other things so that you can begin to pursue it. And that's a good transition actually for some of the things I want to touch on, because you've mentioned a lot of the modalities that we would typically attempt for someone who's, kind of new to this. I think you and I both, I can comfortably say that we're like, we're like veterans of the work at this point, we've both done our due diligence with our own paths. And so I think I can speak to what worked for me and what didn't work. You mentioned that journaling, meditation, therapy, those things didn't work for you, but diving into a men's group did. I think those two words right there, men's group, would make a lot of cops shiver in their spine with what they think those things are. And they're not always wrong. Like there are groups out there that create that very woo dynamic. But what, for someone who's at a point where they say, okay, well, I know I need help, or I know I need to navigate a change in my life, but I don't know where to start. What is the first thing you direct them to?
Oh, there's a lot of parts in that.
We got all the time in the world. Free recording space.
The fact that someone is at that like you've realized, okay, shit, I need to change something. Mm-hmm. You've done the vast majority of the work already, right? You've got yourself to this point, right? Which it was a struggle to get to that point, whatever it was, right? Mm-hmm. So the men's work side, there's a really powerful study that was done in the States. I think it was 2018, 2019, where they talk about men's ability, like how many connections does the average man have? Mm-hmm. And this one here was that it was the average male under the age of 40, when asked, how many people do you have that you could really approach if you needed to talk about something serious? The response for under 40 was 2. The response for over 40 was 0. 0.4, I think it was. Mm-hmm. Right? And a lot of men out there listening to this will be like, bullshit, whatever. I got 10 guys in my fantasy league. Like, yeah, you do. That's awesome. Yeah, go have a beer, have some laughs. But when you need to legitimately talk about something, how many of those guys are you going to approach to talk to, right?
Right.
My thing with working with men specifically is that it gives us that, takes that away a little bit, takes that barrier down a little bit, and you can start to realize like, oh shit, okay, I could call Garrett up if I needed to, right? He's got my back. He's been there, right? And the second that guys get into a group together and they actually start to talk about shit, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that guy's got this too. Oh, that guy's got this too. Oh man, yeah, I can't wait. I'm going to tell him about my stuff. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, what am I doing? I'm talking about stuff. Things are getting like, there's other people here. This is weird.
Sharing feelings. It's getting weird.
Right. And it's like that with every group I've ever seen. Right. And it's just that we just have never been comfortable to talk about that stuff. Because what do we see? What do we raise? We're raised with our dads. When we look up to them, they're the ones that fix everything. Right. Mm-hmm. All the guys all the TV shows, everything we look at, the guys are the ones that are fixing things. They can take care of it, right? So it's ingrained in us, understandably, that no, I should be able to take care of my own shit. Sometimes you need a hand to take care of your stuff, right? And it's so easy to fall into this trap where we have our buddies and whatever, we drink beer, we watch football, all that good stuff, but we don't actually have any connection there because deep seated, there's something there that makes us think that that other man is a challenge of some kind, right? That we're not
Hmm.
completely comfortable there. Right? We can get through that stuff. That's easy.
I think, you know, I always I always want to be careful when I say, like, especially for cops, or like trying to make us like a special group, or like give us
Yeah,
a justification
yeah,
for the why the way we are. But nonetheless, I think that is something that is doubly something that cops struggle with very uniquely versus other populations. And I'll add that I think this includes females too, female cops, because though I think females are generally, I know I'm generalizing here and I just said generally, uh, better at communicating with a core group of friends and sharing. When you're a cop and day one of the academy, you're taught don't show emotion, you got to be in control, all those things. Even with maybe a predisposition to being more open about that stuff, you start to close down. And so for guys, when we go into the academy and we go through the career, and your emotional stability, for lack of a better term, is a crucial part of how you're perceived at work, how they think you can do the job, are you going to be the good backup or not, all those things just start to pile on to the normal things that quote unquote everyday people go through, of getting older and getting more disconnected from others and not having that group and having zero people to really turn to that you can have deep conversations with. And then you really are in a dark space.
yeah.
And so I don't know if you think it's harder for us, or more unique, maybe is the right way to say it, more unique, or if it's just that's just part of being a modern human. I don't know.
Yeah, and I get it 100%. And my immediate response to that is that our problems are the same as everybody else's problems, right? Like, yeah, we're faced with some really gnarly situations and some really
Hmm.
gnarly responsibilities,
Hmm.
but when you cut that stuff out of it, our problems are the same problems that the vast majority of the rest of the population is facing, right? You look at like isolation and you look at mental health and all these things, right?
Hmm.
It's not that it's understandable why we would be susceptible to it with the pressures we face and the things that we see in our jobs. But when you take it all down to the bare minimum, we all have the same problems.
Oh,
Right?
for sure. Yeah, I'm not saying that. It's me. I guess for me, we are we are predisposed to being stuck in the fight or flight that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you're in that constantly, it's just that much harder
Yeah.
to, it's a deeper hole you got to dig out of, so to speak, to
Absolutely.
get back to kind of a
Absolutely.
baseline is what I mean.
I would agree with that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got ourselves dug in by the time we have to get out of it, right? And a lot of
Yeah.
times there's a there's a bit of a downside to some of the work we've done as a community to start shining this light on mental health and really making it be more aware, right? In that
Hmm.
it's left a lot of people thinking like, oh shit, I should be in a really bad place before I reach out for help,
Mm.
right?
Hmm. Yeah, sure.
Because you look at the marketing of things, and bless our departments, they're doing a great job from what I can see from what things used to be like, as far as getting the word out there that like get some help if you need it, take some time if you need it, kind of thing.
Hmm.
But it's started to build it up in my mind a little bit, and from a lot of the men I speak to, where it's now this obstacle of being like, okay, my issue isn't, I'm not suicidal, so I don't need help yet,
Mm.
or I'm not absolutely at rock bottom, I don't need to look into this stuff yet, I'll just wait, right?
Yeah, that's like trying to bail the water, saying your ship is sinking, but like, well, it's knee deep, but I'll wait till it's waist deep before I
Yeah,
start working on it.
yeah, yeah,
I think the other part of that that's really a struggle for people, it was a struggle for me, when there's two things I want to bring up, but one is comparison, and how we as cops and men and humans, we are predisposed to think, well, this person has it worse than I do, or they went through something more traumatic than I did, or I don't have an OIS in my background, but they do. And so they have a reason to feel like they need personal development and personal work, but I don't have a justification for doing those things because mine's not as bad as theirs. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Uh, when in reality, your experience is your experience, good or bad, and you can't. It literally is apples and oranges, to be cliche. Like when we begin to compare ourselves to someone who's had it worse, man, that's a dangerous path we go down. And there's someone out there who is looking at you and saying, well, you have it worse than me. So it's this domino effect, but whatever your experience is your experience. And it doesn't matter if someone's had something different than you or something that's quote unquote more dangerous or more traumatic. They may have navigated it fine. None of that matters. It all matters about what is your experience. And that's what we got to deal with, because you can't control anything else. And we got to, I struggled with that for a long time, was this comparison idea, and had to get over that and realize mine is mine. And, if someone's I wasn't planning to bring this up, but if someone's struggling with this idea that they don't quote unquote deserve treatment or need it, or they just haven't had enough of the quote bad experiences. I'm using a lot of air quotes, aren't I? If they haven't had enough of those bad experiences to warrant seeking help or asking for help, a lot of times we feel like we haven't earned the ask. What I encourage people to do is grab a journal and write out the 20 worst calls you've ever been to. And this may be provoking to some people. It may bring stuff up. That's kind of the point, actually. But write those things out and then just sit with that. And you will see, regardless of what those 20 calls were, that those 20 experiences are things that most humans will never experience in their life. Most humans will experience maybe one, maybe two of those things. And here you got 20. And I did that. I came up with this thing for myself, and I had a hard time stopping at 20.
Yeah.
I had a hard time just picking the top 20, right? And it's gnarly stuff: traffic accidents, deaths, witnessed, and all that sort of stuff. Mudslides, a sunk dive boat, all sorts of gnarly stuff that contextually you go, man, that's really messed up. You had to deal with that. That's crazy. If my friend had showed me that list, I would have been like, man, what can I do to help? If my friend had showed me my own list, I would have said, what can I do to help? How can I be here to help you? But it's my list. So I go, it's not worthy. It's not, I don't justify it, right? How messed up is that? We want to treat our friends better than we want to treat ourselves. We want to be more compassionate to our friends than we are compassionate to ourselves, because we go back to that idea of this language we use of what we should be like, versus what we are. You go through those 20, and if you really want to explore it, challenge yourself to find the best 20. You write your worst 20, easy. Hard to stop at 20. Now, write down the best 20 experiences you've had on the job, the best 20 calls for service you had. Good luck getting to 20. Yeah. You're going to have a hard time remembering the 20 best calls you ever went to. And that'll compare and contrast for you a real challenge in our job and in our lives of how we, like you said earlier, look for the negative. We remember the negative. Our brain is trained to hold on to the negative. So that's what we got to deal with. We got to navigate through those things. So that's a little exercise I sometimes share with people.
Oh, I love that. And you're so right about the good 20 being almost impossible, right? And that all comes from what we talked about for the last hour, right? About that RAS, that all we're doing is focusing on the big bad stuff. And then especially when we get into comparison mode, it's like, oh, my fatal MVI wasn't as bad as that guy's, right? Mm-hmm. It's not the same, right? And I encourage people, actually a really good friend of mine that I started on the ambulance with just kind of made this suggestion on his own, is like, what if at the end of your shift, you just write down like 3 really cool things that happened to you on that shift? where you're like, that little, you held the door open for that little 12-year-old kid and he like gave you a high five, or he's just staring at
Mhm.
you kind of thing. Like he's looking at you with admiration. That's a great feeling. Celebrate that. Write
Mhm.
that down. That's awesome.
For sure. Yeah.
Right. But it's
Uh,
something we just take, we don't even let ourselves see it, let alone feel it.
Yeah. I love that too. And I would do that as a patrol sergeant, would sometimes gather the group together after a rough day and point out the things that they did that made life better for other people. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, I like, as a simple one is like when someone comes up to you and says, thank you for your service. And we get all weirded out and awkward and, well, yeah, thank you. We like want to flee. Want to, most cops, when someone comes up and says that, they want to run. They
Oh
want to
yeah.
get away from it. Right. Like, versus, you know, a little eye contact with a person and accepting of that appreciation, and allowing yourself to accept it and appreciate that as someone who is coming to you human to human saying thank you for doing what you do, and not just putting oh, it's part of the job, like sworn to protect, but accepting that and just internalizing that. That can change your day right there. That could be,
Yes.
that alone could be something that could really shift your day.
The next time somebody says that to anybody that's listening, I challenge you to take a breath and then say thank you.
Hmm.
Right. And just notice the difference. Notice how you feel after that happens. Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
Start to taking advantage of those things is important.
Yeah. 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 So one other thing I want to touch on before we wrap up is something that I struggle with in this podcast and some of the course development that we have. And I want your insight on this, because there's a tendency, and I catch myself doing it too, but there's a tendency to assume, well, I guess there's two fields of thought on this, and I'm trying to formulate the question as I think it, right? So bear with me. But um, I am of the belief that if you are a cop, you have experienced a trauma. You have seen or gone through something that has been traumatic, just by definition. And as I mentioned, the 20 things, you've got 20. The vast majority of the public has maybe one, unlikely, but maybe two, right? But you have experienced those things. Now, how those things have affected you, that's a spectrum within which we work and which we have to navigate. There's plenty of cops who navigate those traumas just fine, who have healthy coping mechanisms, and who are set up for success early. So sometimes the language we use, and I catch myself again doing this, is that everybody's traumatized and everybody's messed up, and that we're all in need of the same kinds of modalities and therapies and men's work and that sort of stuff. And I know that's not true. It's again a spectrum. So how do we introduce, or if someone is feeling like I've had some calls, or I'm struggling, or I need to improve in this way or that, but I don't feel suicidal. I don't feel despondent, but maybe I'm not at my best. You know what I mean? There's a spectrum
Yeah.
there. And so it's not like everyone needs to be rushed into therapy via ambulance, but how do we begin to have a conversation, or open up cops to the idea that you don't have to be completely messed up before you start doing this work, and being proactive about it really is in your benefit. How do we convince cops that just because you've experienced a trauma doesn't mean you're traumatized? And how do we get them to get interested in doing this work proactively?
Whew. I wish I knew the direct answer to
And I'm at,
that.
and I'm asking, and I ask this
Yeah,
to provoke a conversation about it, but also because
absolutely.
I think leaders in agencies are wondering what they can do, and not necessarily like, oh, I need to get Steve into a men's group, or I need to get him into
Yeah,
a personal development book or whatever, but like, what are the things that we can do to introduce people to these concepts?
yeah,
And that's really actually where the squad room started from. Was I was bringing these concepts into my briefings, um, and was getting good feedback. Guys were actually responding to things like how to do gratitude, how to meditate, how to breathe during high stress incidents. And I was having these goofy briefings that were atypical of what a typical cop briefing is, but people were coming up and telling me, hey, I feel these I understand these things. This worked for me. Thanks for teaching us about hypervigilance, et cetera, et cetera. And realizing that, well, if I feel these things and then I learned them and then I taught them to my core group and the my core group is responding back that these things were working and they were important for them, then there's got to be other cops out there dealing with this too. And lo and behold, I'm
Yeah.
right. But as a leader in an agency, as a leader in the field, is it just talking about these things and being willing to be more open? Maybe that's the first step.
I think it's leading by example and showing that, like, when you put in the work, people are going to notice. Okay, like
Mm-hmm.
that your resting bitch face, for example, is probably going to dissipate a little bit. Right, soft talk acknowledged with the probably, you can take that out. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and just demystifying what you think is self development is so important in our community, right? Because right now it's, you go into it with the frame of mind that I had in 2016, 2017 of, like, okay, meditation, I need to be on a pillow, cross-legged, with a room full of candles and straight back. Like, I couldn't even sit down cross-legged, let alone do that. So no,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to do that, right? And started that with that story of meditating and journaling being this thing that I really hated. I love them now, like, daily. But it's different, right? There's meditations you can do where you just put headphones on and you listen to some frequency based music, for example, right? 10 minutes of that and you're in a totally new headspace, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
apps for journaling. You can learn how to journal effectively, right? You can join programs like my program or 100 other ones that are out there that can teach you those kind of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's
Mm-hmm.
taking the extreme side of it out of it and being like, I don't have to be a monk in a cave on a mountain to meditate, or I don't have to be my perfect handwriting and writing this elegant story about something to journal, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
all these things that we can do to better ourselves that aren't as extreme as they seem, right? And if you're starting to notice things like you mentioned about calls, we can stop beating around the bush and just accept that we've all seen calls that have been hard to look at, right? Hard to
Mm-hmm.
watch, right? When we start to tell ourselves stories about those calls, they play on repeat in our heads. And they might not be ones that quote unquote traumatize us, but they've affected us in some way. They've planted a seed in our head, right? So they're there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And stories will either annoy us, hurt us, or haunt us, the things that stick in our head. One of those three things. So it might be that guy that cut you off that you think about all the time, that annoyed you, right? Might be that bad breakup you had that you haven't got over yet, that hurt you. Or it might be that dead child that you saw at a call that will haunt you, right? And you can work through these stories, right? I offer, and a lot of the other coaches that have done the training that I have offer the same services where it's like you work through some of these stories by writing them out, by using words, and then you add some breath to it and you give yourself some space and clarity from those things, right? So we don't have to have these things stuck in our head all the time. You don't have to be
Mm-hmm.
annoyed, hurt, or haunted by these things forever, right? You can get through
Mm-hmm.
them. So to take that back to the kind of the question that you started with is that just try it. You have to try it to be able to get out of wherever you're at, right? Whether that's
There's a lot. Yeah.
something as simple as downloading Headspace or something like that, and just trying. If
Right.
it doesn't work, great. Try the next thing, right? Get curious about it.
That right there. I think that get curious,
Yeah,
because I think that's key number one, right? We're cops. We're always looking for the evidence, and it's not going to be immediately apparent to you what works for you. It's going to take trial and error. It's going to take work. It's going to take being open to new experiences and being a little uncomfortable too.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
one last like tactical thing I think I encourage people to do is when those thoughts come up, when when that memory gets provoked of that call or something, is learning to sit with that feeling for a second. And you're going to think about the call and you're not going to think about the feeling behind it. You're just going to think about, you're going to have a flash of, you know, what the call was like, and you're going to be able to envision what had happened and the dynamics or the temperature outside or and I'm not talking flashback, you're just recalling a memory, um, you will think of those things, but you won't think of the feeling you had in that when you're having that memory. But to actually ask yourself, what did it feel like when that was going on? And this is for those memories that are reoccurring and that are coming up. And if you're struggling with these things, even if it's the guy that cut you off in traffic, what did that feel like? Well, I was angry or sad, or seeing the dead kid, or any of those things like. And just acknowledging that that emotion was legitimate. Like, yeah, that was frustrating. It was frustrating, or it was anger, or yeah, that was sad. That was sad seeing the dead kid. Like, it's okay to just acknowledge that was a sadness. No one's going to fault you for that.
Yeah.
It was scary when he pulled the gun. It was scary. That's okay. It's okay to be scared, and just at least saying that emotion to yourself and saying that feeling to yourself is just, that's like a huge leap forward right there. Is if you can at least say it to yourself. You don't have to express it outside of yourself to anybody yet, but just say it to yourself, and then allow yourself to have felt that.
Yeah, and
Yeah, that was scary.
that's the big one there that you touch on at the end. Allow yourself to feel that, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
the beauty in that, the story work process that I mentioned there, where we break it down into 4 steps and you actually
Mm-hmm.
get a chance to feel it. Because in the call, you didn't you didn't feel it then, right? You did your job like a badass and you worked through whatever that horrific thing was, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's
Mm-hmm.
still stuck in there, right? It needs to be dealt with, right?
Right.
You have to
Yeah.
let yourself feel it, right? And it's not easy to do. It sucks, quite honestly, but the juice is worth the squeeze on the other side of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can remember some really rough calls that I attended that they planted that seed in my mind where they just come up once in a while. I wasn't traumatized by them, but once a week, once every couple weeks, it's just there.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, okay, yeah, that sucked. That was shitty. Let's do something else. Or maybe it comes up in a meditation and it ruins that chance to have a meditation because you're like, I definitely don't want to think about that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you work through these experiences, these memories, and then all of a sudden they don't hold that emotional charge to them anymore. Right. You're not held, they don't captivate you like they used to. They're still there.
Yeah.
But like now, after having worked through these crappy memories, right? If it comes up now, I'm just like, oh yeah, yeah, that happened. Because that
Yeah.
I've let myself feel it. I've let myself go through it. So it's
Yeah.
gone now. Yeah. Totally
What I
overlooked.
found. Oh yeah, and if you really want to be brave about it, when someone hears about a call or they express to you some sympathy about the call, rather than just brush it off as it's part of the job, acknowledge it. Yeah, that was hard. And that's a really courageous person that has the ability to do that.
Yeah.
Um, one other thing I want to touch on this particular point is that this practice has made me a much better supervisor and leader and just partner and human because when you're able to label those things for yourself, it becomes so much easier to do it for other people. And so as an example, um, recently had a car accident with an infant ejected from the car. You can imagine how that all went. It
Mm-hmm.
was 4 kids in this traffic accident, right? And as the call's going out, and I'm not responding to it, I'm not even in the same area of our county, but I'm hearing it. I'm already thinking about the deputies that are responding. I know who they are. I know their histories with us. I know their family life, and at least, I mean, we're not tight by any means, but I know who they are. And pausing for a second to just accept that that's probably gonna be very hard for them to deal with. And like I can accept that because I know what that's like because I've accepted it for myself. And so that empathy for your partners comes into play. And I'm not trying to make myself out to sound like a badass here, but like it just opens you up to this ability that this person is doing something that's incredibly hard right now. Incredibly hard, right? Um, they've done it. I've had to do it, but I know not only is it's not, so it takes away this whole like, well, I had to do it, so they got to do it, or this like, well, you're the trainee or you're the new guy, so you got to go through what I went through. It's like, that's not that at all. It's, I've had that same experience. I know the challenges that they're going to be faced with over the next couple of hours, and that it opens you to being more receptive to them, but also being more tuned into them and in their mental state or their health and their emotions about how you can help and what are the things you can do regardless of where you're at for these people. So that is, if nothing else comes out of this, then you want to be a better leader so you can be that guy at work. Like, consider this work as a benefit to everyone around you, not just yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And that's sparks again from the awareness of realizing that guy's in the shit right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I've been there. I know what that's like. Right. So
Yeah.
maybe I'd drive up to him, roll down the window and ask how he's doing a little bit later. Right.
Yeah.
Doesn't have
Yeah.
to be the
Just
one man show that we think it has to be all the time. Right. And we know that
right.
we'll put the blinders on and act like we're solid, but a text here and there every once in a while just to check in with a guy after something like that is huge, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a wonderful spot to be in. And granted, none of us are done, right? There's no such thing as like, oh, well, personal development's over with. Got this, read the one book that everyone needs to
That's the
read or
worst
did
part is
one
that it keeps
course
going.
or yeah, it's you're opening Pandora's box a bit, but but I want to assure people, like, if you're really willing to commit to doing the work, it only gets better. Like,
Yeah.
I've never met anybody that's committed to doing the work and gotten worse.
No,
you know,
no.
it's almost impossible, because when you commit to do the work, that means you remain flexible to different things that you might be exposed to and to try the things until you find your thing.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful path. I never understood I, we've been using this lingo, do the work, and I heard it a lot. I never quite understood what it meant. um I still think you kind of can't understand what it means until you've done the work. It's like this like secret password that, but it really just means like taking ownership of what you can control, and then working towards finding what works for you, to actualize yourself as best you can.
Yeah.
And we're all on that spectrum somewhere, and some of us are far ahead of others and some of us are a few steps behind. But if we can get everybody on that same path, man, what a different life, a different career, a different profession, a different relationship with the public we'll have.
Oh, in every facet of the job, you're absolutely right. And
Yeah.
it's, you're right. There is like this daunting thing about the work, right?
Mhm.
What is that? Like, if there's any part of you that feels like your life isn't as good as it could be, there's an opportunity to do some work there, right? That's
Mhm.
what I mean by work, right?
Yep.
And if you want to be a more of a badass on the range, or you want to kill that ERT team tryout or something like that, right? Doing the work on yourself is only going to improve you in every other aspect of that, right? Being
Mhm.
able to control your breathing, being able to control your nervous system, stuff like that. Like, that's going to play a huge impact in every part of your life, whether it's at work, whether it's at the gym, whether it's in your relationship, whether it's as a dad, as a friend, as anything,
Mhm.
right? It's worth it. You just have to put
Yeah.
in a little bit of effort. That's all.
And just like all those things you mentioned, your firearms, your arrest and control tactics, your driving, your workouts, it's a perishable skill,
Yeah.
and you might get to you might achieve a high level of self-awareness or of personal development or feel like you've made it there, but without techniques to keep you there, we will, just as humans, revert back to some of those bad habits and those bad attitudes and those bad modalities that we used to have, because that's what we knew. So it is definitely a perishable skill. Kyle, thanks for sharing this conversation. We could probably go on for a lot longer, but I know we need to wrap up. Where can people find out more about you and the work you're doing?
My website primarily, kylestubbs.ca, and on Instagram and Facebook, not huge on either of those for obvious reasons. But yeah, the website's where everything's at. There's links to courses on there. I keep a blog pretty updated, and monthly workshops free to join in, whether it's going to be on language or meditating, journaling, any of these self-development kind of things. Throwing those out once a month or so as well. So we offer a 10-week course just for men, just for first responders. It's all geared on everything from self-development, from awareness to relationship to mindset, vitality, all these things. So a great place to dive in for anybody that's interested.
Great. And we'll put links to all of your stuff in the show notes. So you just have to go to this episode in your podcast player, scroll through the show notes, and you can find everything you want to find on Kyle and the work he's doing. Great conversation today. Love that. Again, the way I started the conversation here, love that this started as an email years ago with you navigating your own journey, learning from it, going through a lot of the trainings to be able to turn around and help the guy after you. That's just, to me, exemplifies the servant mindset and a huge heart and a goal of helping the helpers, so thanks for doing what you're doing and for sharing with us today, Kyle.
Hey, thanks, Garrett. Do the work. Do the work.
That's it, really. Maybe that's the title instead of do the woo. Do the work.
Just do the work.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're new to the show, make sure you check through our catalog of episodes because you're going to find some amazing guests and some great actionable ideas you can take into your day. Also, I want to offer you something I'm very excited about, and it's absolutely free. It's my Tactical Tuesday newsletter. Every Tuesday, I want to bring you a few tactics, tips, and strategies to help you succeed in the week ahead. It may be a book I want to share, some gear I found useful, an inspiring quote, or anything else I think you'd like. To sign up for the Tactical Tuesday email list, you can visit thesquadroom.net/Tactical Tuesdays, or just text your email address to 805-364-2331. That's 805-364-2331. If you didn't catch that, check the show notes for this episode, and you can find it there, and I promise we won't sell or spam your email address. Before we wrap up, I have a challenge for you. If you got something out of this episode, if you were inspired by our conversation today, I want to challenge you right now to take a photo of your podcast player as you're playing this episode, and I want you to share it with 3 friends, people who you think need to hear what we talked about today. Send them this episode and recommend that they listen to it. Also, please consider leaving a review on the podcast player of your choice. If you have a few seconds, please leave a comment with your review because it really helps us spread the word about the show and it helps more cops find the valuable lessons that we have here. Also, join us on Facebook at our Facebook group, follow our page, and on Instagram at The Squad Room. A special thanks to today's sponsor, OfficerPrivacy.com. If cleaning up your name on the internet and making it harder for criminals to find you is important, check them out at OfficerPrivacy.com/The Squad Room, where their deal for you as a listener of this show is they'll give you a free USB data blocker and 1 month of free monitoring when you sign up. I want to thank our sponsor for this episode, In Time. In Time is the state-of-the-art, easy-to-use, and incredibly simple way to schedule shifts, improve subpoena compliance, reduce officer fatigue, and manage special events, and much more. Make sure to check them out at intime.com/The Squad Room to learn more about their affordable and simple solutions for public safety. Also, there are some other great companies who support the podcast and support you as well. Go to thesquadroom.net/support to see exclusive deals from Signature Coins, Hard to Kill Fitness, Onnit, Ranger Up, Hardhead Veterans, and Audible. And if you're looking for the best fitting ballistic helmet that exceeds NIJ standards and won't break the bank, check out hardheadveterans.com and use the coupon code SQUADROOM to get $20 off your helmet. All right, until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.